Okay, we are live.
Welcome back to Senate Education. We're going to shift our focus now to S204, an act relating to reading assessment and intervention. And we have Ms. Siglowski, Ms. Myers, and hopefully Mr. Nichols. This is listed as the agency response, but I don't think do we have anybody from the agency coming in, Morgan?
No, sorry. They canceled and yeah.
Okay, so let's get the agency response. Let's push them to Friday, if you would.
Okay.
Okay, great. Ms. Siglowski, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sue Siglowski. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on S204. VSBA has a shared commitment to improving student performance in reading. We work closely with our colleagues at the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont Principals Association, the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association, and Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators to support better outcomes for students. I did submit written testimony. I know Morgan's having trouble uploading that, but you will have that when that's able to be added to your website. School boards support improved student outcomes, including literacy, by creating and sustaining conditions that support excellent teaching and learning. We do this by setting school policies, hiring and evaluating the superintendent, adopting measurable goals to support student academic progress, and by developing an annual budget that aligns with stated priorities and provides an equitable distribution of resources to help meet the goals that are set by the school board. We leave the how to our superintendents, who under Vermont law are designated as the chief executive officer for the supervisory union or supervisory district. School boards rely on the professional expertise of their superintendents to chart the path for reaching the stated goals. In the area of literacy, I've provided you with a couple of examples in my written testimony of goals that a school board could set based on the data that it has for its students. And the formula for these type of goals is to move students from X to Y by Z. So one of the examples I give is our school district will increase the percentage of students who are proficient or above in third grade reading as measured by and you insert whatever measurement you're doing, from X percentage in spring 2023 to Y percentage in spring 2028. So that's an example of a goal that a school board might set, provide to their superintendent, and ask for a plan of how are we going to accomplish this goal. Another example of a goal would be in our school district, the gap between all students and low-income students in third grade reading achievement, identified as non-proficient or partially proficient, as measured by whatever the measurement is, will decrease from X percentage in spring 2023 to another percentage in spring 2028. So you're trying to narrow that gap. So once the goals are set, the superintendent puts a plan in place to achieve the goals, and school boards monitor the results. School boards can also adopt policies if needed, and they direct resources to meet the goals through their budget process. And school boards can use the superintendent evaluation process to hold the superintendent accountable for making reasonable progress towards those goals. S204 is a bill that gets at the how to improve student outcome and literacy, and as such, VSBA is very interested in VSA and VSPA's, in VSA and VPA's analysis of the bill. So really, what is the legislature's goal? And then in VSA and VPA's professional opinion, does the bill provide the steps that should be taken to reach that goal? And I'm sure that Chelsea Myers and Jay Nichols will provide you with some more substantive information about that in their testimony. Lastly, I would like to comment on the reporting requirement in the bill on page 6, line 16, that requires each school board to annually report in writing to the Agency of Education on or before September 1st of each year, information on the prior school year by grade, school, and town. And I was just curious about why the bill assigns this responsibility to school boards rather than superintendents for the reasons that I laid out earlier in my testimony. My initial response is that it might be more appropriate to require the superintendent rather than the school board to submit the required reports. Thank you for your commitment to improving literacy outcome for Vermont students, and we certainly share that commitment. And that concludes my testimony.
So if I were to sort of do a little synopsis, correct me. So I'm wrong. You're really interested, you support literacy, of course, school boards. You're really interested in having the principals and the superintendents weigh in on this bill, since school boards really believe that these are the people that you're hiring to do this, to fulfill these obligations.
Yes, correct.
Great. Yeah, Senator Gulick.
Thank you for that. It's very helpful. Do you think it's fair to hold a superintendent accountable for progress or outcomes when he has been, or she has been, or they have been victims, I'm gonna use the word victims, of a sort of an inadequate system of teaching literacy, or a system that clearly hasn't worked to its full potential? I mean, do you think that's fair? I'm just curious.
Well, I think it's important when setting a goal to have a reasonable timeline so that the administrator has a chance to use the whatever tools they think are the proper tools in order to reach the goal.
Okay. I just wonder what happens when the tool that we think was the best tool turns out it was not the best tool, and we have, you know, new learning and new understanding and shifting science around what's best. It to me, again, as you guys hear me say this multiple times every day, but as someone on the school board, I don't feel comfortable trying to measure my superintendent's success, especially around literacy, when from everything I've learned points to the fact that we've been doing it wrong. And we didn't necessarily know that we were doing it wrong, but we're realizing now as we kind of peel back the layers that there's just been some faulty, I don't even want to say science because I'm not sure it was science, but faulty pedagogy. So anyway, that's more of just like a rhetorical thing I wanted to say. You don't need to answer that per se.
Do you have a sense, may I ask, if that's happening out there? Is that the superintendents are losing their jobs because of reading scores not being?
I don't think they're losing their jobs, but to Mrs. Glasky's point, that is our job as a school board. Like, we are there to assess the success of the superintendent.
I see what you're saying.
It is part of our job. It's a big part of our job to evaluate outcomes and success.
Yeah.
So who sets the policy for the techniques for teaching reading? Is it the AOE?
Well, I mean, we're looking at one right now. Yeah.
So let's say that superintendent, when they
Oh, in terms of the sign.
right, they decided to go with hooked on phonics. That wasn't the latest teaching method. He jumped up and down. He probably would have got fired for that. I get your point. Your point is the deal the hand you dealt, and if it didn't pan out, then you can get replaced. Tough business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was to support your point.
Yeah.
Finally
Through that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something I wanted to say, but I didn't
I know.
say it. We can talk later, I guess.
I also submitted my testimony to Morgan, and
Okay.
I was informed that it wasn't there. There are some links to resources, so I recommend looking at the virtual offering. Thank you for inviting testimony from the Vermont Superintendents Association on the important topic of reading instruction and outcomes. Quite frankly, literacy is a human right and foundational to being a lifelong learner, and all Vermont leaders should treat it as such. First, my name is Chelsea Myers. I am the Associate Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association, and this testimony has been reviewed and contributed to by several superintendents and a reading specialist. Early in my career, I had the privilege of serving as the lab manager of the Laboratory for Educational Neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, where I conducted neuroscience research on early literacy development, publishing in peer-reviewed journals and book chapters. The testimony I aim to provide to you today will, one, speak to literacy policy and reform overall, and two, speak directly to the proposed legislation. And I do have some suggestions, and those are in the spirit of collaboration, not to say we oppose it at all, but just to help inform some of the language.
And I should mention, Ms. Myers was incredibly helpful when we did Act 28.
I don't know about that, but I
Incredibly
thank
helpful.
you.
The literacy transformation that we did 2 years ago.
So the first section is titled Equity and Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. Equity must be at the forefront of this work. Data indicate that students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, BIPOC students, English language learners, and students with disabilities are disproportionately not getting what they need from the system to succeed in learning to read and write at the benchmark set for all students. Equitable access to high quality instruction must be a top priority in supporting this work. This is particularly challenging given the workforce shortages of highly skilled professionals in some regions of the state. VSA actively participated in the Ethnic and Social Equity Standards Advisory Working Group for its duration. Reading instruction is interwoven into the principles of creating culturally responsive and inclusive environments for all students. The availability and use of texts that are culturally relevant and representative of historically underrepresented voices is critical to ensure that all students can connect their experience to the text they are reading. Though often unintentional, implicit biases impact the expectations for students. Expectations for students impact the way that educators interact with students and ultimately are correlated with student achievement. For these reasons, we ask that the Senate Education Committee consider ways in which the legislature can support the successful implementation of the anticipated revisions to the education quality standards, which came from that group. The next segment is titled Early Learning. Learning to read and write starts long before first grade and has long-lasting effects. Learning to read and write is an ongoing process from infancy. Contrary to popular belief, it does not suddenly begin in kindergarten or first grade. From the earliest years, everything that adults do to support children's language and literacy is critical, and that's from the NEAR report in 2006. Early language and other literacy skill development is of utmost importance to later literacy achievement. For this reason, comprehensive literacy policy should focus on these earlier years. For example, policy considerations could include looking at early learning standards related to literacy across the pre-K delivery system. Are they consistent with research in early language and literacy development? Are they consistently applied? Providing training and support for early childhood educators in evidence-based early language and literacy skill development and screening. And third, considering elements of programs like Providence Talks that aim to close the word gap. The next segment is teacher preparation. The report, Early Literacy in Vermont, Findings from the Vermont Educator Preparation Program Course Syllabi Review, commissioned in Act 28, found that 60% of educators recommended for certification in early childhood special education, and elementary pathways are served by the 6 educator prep programs studied by the researchers.
Can I just one moment?
Yeah.
Morgan, committee members are really wanting to see this document.
Yes, I will resend the email. I'm sorry.
I would just send it with just the, yeah, that would be great.
No.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thus, focusing on educator preparation programs in Vermont could be an influential policy lever since it accounts for 60% of those educators serving our students. Generally, the survey in the report found that the 6 educator prep programs covered the 6 key reading components. However, reports from the field suggest that many educators are not confident in their ability to teach reading, and education administrators anecdotally report a decrease in the readiness of early career educators as they leave higher education institutions. This might be related to the pedagogical intensity findings found in the report. So please consider further investigating pre-service programs in Vermont as a policy lever. And then I link a report from the Education Commission of the states outlining policies that other states have employed in this pre-service arena. Early screening intervention in Act 173 is the next segment that I'll talk about. Research underscores the critical significance of early literacy screening and intervention in shaping children's educational trajectories. Studies consistently demonstrate that early identification of literacy challenges significantly improve outcomes. Early screening, as proposed by this bill, has a twofold purpose. One, identifying struggling students, and two, also informing the system of the efficiency of their Tier 1 instruction. So Tier 1 is that universal general education instruction. For the latter purpose, the district management group's report titled Expanding and Strengthening Best Practice Supports for Students Who Struggle, which laid the foundation, again linked in the virtual version, which laid the foundation for Act 173 of 2018, said the following. For districts with large numbers of students through small groups or individual Tier 2 or special education in For districts with large numbers of students who are not meeting goals, it's not desirable or practical to serve all students through small group or individual Tier 2 or special education interventions. Many of these students can and must be helped through improvements in primary universal Tier 1 instruction. So that's, again, high quality general education instruction. A core underpinning of the multi-tiered system of support, MTSS model, is that extra interventions serve 10 to 15% of students. Across the state of Vermont, approximately 45%, this data is a little bit old, of students did not score proficient in ELI on the state assessment, grades 3 through 5, for the 25 through 2016 school year. Investing in the effectiveness of core reading instruction is critical for students in general education and students with disabilities, and can ultimately reduce the number of students in Tier 2 and special education reading interventions. That's not to say to leave them behind, it's talking about the efficiency of that Tier 1 instruction, that putting resources into that Tier 1 instruction is an important part of the whole literacy system. And that quote is from the district management group report.
Please.
No, go for it.
I'm just curious, if when you look at, I'm still getting to know this numbers, S204, yeah, S204. Do you see this as a bill that is primarily in Tier 1?
Yes.
Yeah, me too, I was curious if we're on the same page there.
I mean, it does influence the other tiers when you identify students who are struggling, but screening is really looking at that universal instruction, how are we doing, and that's when you take it in the aggregate, and then also to figure out what interventions might be appropriate for a student that is not being served well by the Tier 1 instruction. So it's kind of twofold in that way. So.
Right, and then, sorry, another question, this gets kind of pedagogical, but do you foresee where like the Tier 2 targeted instruction could take place in a sort of just like within a Tier 1 differentiated model?
I would defer to a reading specialist. My sense is that that would still potentially be considered Tier 1 in certain circumstances and sometimes Tier 2, depending on the intervention, but please don't quote me on that.
Okay, no, I think we're on the same page so far, yeah, thank you.
Investing in universal instruction is imperative for supporting improvement in reading achievement. Early assessment tools can and should inform systems on how to improve Tier 1 instruction. What does investing in universal instruction for Tier 1 instruction look like? Ensuring that educators are equipped with the training and coaching support necessary to provide high quality reading instruction to all students. The purpose of S204 significantly overlaps with the principles that were foundational to Act 173 of 2018, a law that was grounded in 2 robust studies and laid out an implementation plan and technical support from the field. Despite a well-crafted piece of legislation, there have been significant challenges with state-level support for implementation, seen in both the professional learning requirements for the Agency of Education and the rulemaking process, which did not live up to the expectations of flexibility for the field. This is to say that Act 173 is an excellent and comprehensive systems approach for serving students who struggle, and a valuable policy lever. VSA asks that you consider doing a deeper dive into the history and present day of Act 173, monitor whether stakeholders have fulfilled their responsibilities under the law, and reinvest in successfully implementing the best practices that laid the groundwork for that legislation. So now specific to S204. Thank you to the sponsors of this specific bill and the Senate Education Committee for their commitment to ensuring that we improve reading outcomes for students in Vermont. The following is specific feedback related to the proposed legislation. And again, this is in the spirit of collaboration. It is not in any way saying that we oppose the bill. I do go like certain page line, just to let you know if you have the bill open or not. Please take testimony from school district administrators and the Agency of Education about how this bill fits within the context of the larger education delivery system, including but not limited to local comprehensive systems, local comprehensive assessment systems, MTSS, Act 173, and IDEA. Any new initiative should align within the context of these existing educational structures. The requirements laid out in S204 require significant training and expertise at a time when school districts are contending with very notable workforce shortages. That is to say, increasing the information that we have about students by means of early screening is important. However, screeners are only as good as the knowledge, expertise, training, and experience of those administering the screeners, interpreting results, and providing instruction and interventions. Published lists of approved screeners from the Agency of Education. So that's page 2, line 11. The superintendent that informed this testimony agreed that having a list of universal screeners at no cost to school districts could be a helpful resource. They expressed concern about the limited expertise at the Agency of Education, which did expand under Act 28, but might not be sufficient to lead significant reading reform. Please consider adjusting the language to the following. The Agency of Education shall identify and publish a list of approved universal reading screeners in consultation with no fewer than 3 school district-based reading specialists. The universal screeners and screeners for dyslexia characteristics, that language on page 2. The current language switching between universal screeners and screeners for dyslexia characteristics is difficult to follow and distinguish. Screening is a critical component of an effective MTSS, and a solid comprehensive assessment system as part of an MTSS can and must adequately screen for literacy skills. However, universal screening, as defined by the International Dyslexia Association, is used to determine a student's risk for reading difficulty and the need for intervention. This is inclusive of, but not exclusive to, dyslexia. Please consider revising the language in S204 to say at risk for experiencing reading difficulties or at risk for experiencing reading difficulties, including risk of dyslexia.
Senator Williams.
What is MTSS?
Multi-tiered system of support. So that is referring to kind of what we've been talking about with the core instruction, like with what you would get in a kind of a regular classroom setting, and then intervention strategies are the subsequent tiers.
Right.
Yeah. Page 4, line 5, a dyslexia screener will be administered when students show deficits in reading and spelling words despite receiving evidence-based instruction. How are deficits defined in the context of a dyslexia screener? How will a dyslexia screener fit within the context of diagnostic evaluation and the rights of students under IDEA, or the rights of students to qualify for an IEP? The characteristics outlined on page 2 and 3 of S204 should be properly vetted by school district-based reading specialists and informed by evidence. This is outside the scope of my expertise and the testimony that I can provide today. Page 3, line 10, please consider revising this wording to inform the instructional strategies for students in need of additional support. Gets rid of, or suggests getting rid of a little bit of that language in there to just allow for flexibility within the system in terms of how they address those needs. Page 4, line 13, what does more regularly mean in this context? And then individual reading plans. VSA recommends that the committee learn more from administrators and educators about how an individual reading plan fits within the context of personalized learning plans and IEPs. If this is too tedious to do this line by line, please stop
This
me.
is helpful. Yeah. We'll have you in again, but this is helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, as we do markup.
I realized it was a lot.
Conversations, yeah.
Page 4, line 10. At this time, BSA recommends focusing on what it must include or what the intervention must include rather than what it may not include. You're talking about the queuing system, and one of the reasons we suggest that is there's current pending case law around a state that had banned a particular methodology. So if we do outline what we want, that will for sure be included in the strategies that educators are using. And I did link to a little bit of information about that case law at the end of the document as well. Page 16, line 16, please consider changing school board to school district. Sue outlined the reasoning for that and whose responsibility it is.
Page 6, I think, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, typo. Page 7, line 4, how is deficiency defined? Vermont educator preparation programs, implementation of reading instructional programs on page 7, line 13. As specified earlier in the testimony, educator preparation as a policy lever is of interest to BSA. How would this be monitored and assessed? So thank you for including that in the bill recommendations. And I'm just wondering in more detail how that would come about. And then on page 8, line 9, it says a school reading specialist shall provide. While BSA agrees wholeheartedly with the intent of this provision, not every school has a reading specialist, as defined by someone holding a reading specialist certification. Perhaps the committee could consider expanding the definition to include other professional credentials. At its essence, this gets at the recommendation found in the DMG report for students who struggle to receive instruction from highly skilled educators. The early literacy screening guidance from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is a comprehensive, and it's linked there, is a comprehensive tool that addresses many of the points that I surfaced in this testimony in, I think, really great way, and could be a useful tool when considering the revisions offered today. The guidance is in support of Massachusetts Regulation 603 CMR 28.03, which requires schools to screen students' reading ability from kindergarten to 3rd grade at least twice per school year, use DESE approved screeners, determine appropriate actions, and notify parents within 30 school days. So some parallels with their law and this bill. A comprehensive approach to improving reading outcomes will work to ensure that quality instruction is happening across the state, that our teachers have the skills they need to teach reading, and that our intervention systems have the skills and resources needed to address those who struggle. Thank you to the committee for examining this issue. BSA shares your concern about the state of reading in Vermont. There are a number of reading specialists, special educators, curriculum directors, and superintendents who would be great assets in informing how to address the state of reading in Vermont. I would be happy to connect you with those experts. A short video is linked for your consideration about how reading policy evolved in 2023 and what's ahead. Thank you.
Reading policy nationwide.
Nationwide, yes. Talk about that lawsuit around the free queuing method.
This has given us a lot to chew on, a lot of possible witnesses. I would, if you would email Morgan, copy Senator Hewlett, the sponsor, and myself on some witness ideas. That would be great. Specific names, anybody, when you say superintendents, folks like that.
That sounds great. Okay. I do have one.
Yeah, please, jump in.
And I don't, this may not be the time for it, but it'd be helpful if at some point, if possibly you or someone at the BSA could speak to, I'm trying to find where this question was. Basically professional development. What was that your second bullet point?
The training needed for to be able to administer and properly utilize the screener.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if someone could speak to the training needed to really bring this to fruition and really give it teeth and, you know, make it a success if we are able to go in this direction. But also just like inform our committee on what kinds of professional development opportunities are out there or available. What do schools require of their teachers? What kind of monies are available to teachers for, you know, all of that would be, I think, really helpful to give us a little bit of context around what's possible.
Yes,
That'd be great.
I'd be happy to. And also in that Massachusetts report, they outline a framework for professional learning around screening too, which is, I think, helpful. More broadly, the specificity I can certainly bring
Right,
people
because just
to the
from,
table.
yeah, from my perspective, it seems as though school districts have both time and resources sort of baked into their schedules now specifically for professional development. So that could be a really nice opportunity to do some of this work.
I'd be happy to recommend some folks. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry
Can you
for the
stick around?
tedious line by line.
No, it's actually good
No, it's
testimony. It's
so
helpful.
great.
We can go back, we can reference it. It's great.
Helpful.
And feel free to stay right where you are. Jay is
Okay.
zooming in. Hey, Mr. Nichols, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Senator Campion?
Doing well.
Good.
Do you have, I know you have testimony. It has been emailed to us. It should be close to the top. It's from Morgan.
You want me to screen share or do you want me to?
We're gonna turn up the volume. Hold on.
How's that?
Say something, Jay.
Hello, how are you?
No.
One more time?
Hello, how's everybody doing?
That's not doing anything, is it? I was just doing this volume down here.
Morgan, how do you turn up?
It should just be the little in the bottom right of the iPad down there.
Okay. How's that, Jay?
I can hear you folks perfect.
All right,
That's a
let's
little
go with that. Okay, floor is yours.
Do you want me to share my screen? Or can you
Sure.
see the
Oh, we
testimony?
have it right in front of us.
Okay, perfect. I'll be brief. I would like to, for the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. I'd also like to say for the record, whenever we have anything to do with literacy from now on, I'd prefer to testify before Chelsea Myers so I don't look as bad.
Yeah.
Chelsea and I did talk last night. I did tell her I was going to say something like that. So first, thank you, Senator Gulick and Hashim for signing on to this bill and the Senate Education Committee in general for your strong interest over the last few legislative sessions in looking to assist schools in improving instruction and ultimately outcomes in reading performance for our students. Nothing is more important in the academic realm than helping kids become good readers by the end of third grade. In the first section, the VPA supports the concept of universal screeners to be identified and published by the Agency of Education. We ask that while the agency continues to identify appropriate screeners, which they've already done some work on, they take careful stock of what districts already have in place on universal screeners. Systems that have effective screening mechanisms already in place should not have to make unnecessary changes. Screeners being available at no cost is very important as it ensures we don't unwittingly disadvantage school districts with less financial resources. And to that point, there will be human resources involved too. With people doing the work and any training that's necessary, but anything you can do to mitigate the financial cost of the actual screeners will be very useful. The requirements for the screener are aligned with previous work that resulted in Act 28 of 2021 and is supported by the work of the Advisory Council on Literacy. I'm especially heartened by the requirement that the universal screening process be brief. When I was in superintendent, we were using Fontes and Pinnell type assessments, and we were spending 45, 50 minutes at a time on a kid, individual kid. So teachers were out of the classroom trying to do the assessment, and then you can't be instructing the rest of the kids at the same time. So I'm hopeful that these universal screeners will be very helpful. Obviously, there'll be some students that will need additional screening and in some cases further diagnostic assessment. However, a strong universal screener can easily assist professional educators in a manner that can change instruction to better meet the needs of each individual student and focus on any reading deficiencies that should be addressed sooner rather than later. A couple of concluding thoughts related. One, I think it makes sense to make sure the Advisory Council on Literacy does not sunset. With research and application changes in the field of reading, which have been happening since the 1970s, It's important to have a group who oversees and continues to make sure that literacy improvement is front and center in Vermont. And I did mention here the language in the last sentence that says which a school reading specialist shall provide might be too restrictive. School reading specialist is an actual endorsement in the state of Vermont. I feel more comfortable with language that is less restrictive. The key is that the services are provided by someone who's qualified to provide those services. Again, I'm a big fan of reading specialists, but I don't want someone to inadvertently, something to inadvertently occur that would actually restrict potential services to students because the school could not get someone with that endorsement. And then my final comment, subject to any questions, is let's be very careful about prescribing anything that would be considered curriculum or requiring a certain program to be used. I know you're not trying to do that here, but there are a ton of commercial for-profit groups out there that sell screening programs, curriculum packages, make billions of dollars, who claim to be able to produce better reading results. And often they develop their own paid-for research that supports their product. So let's try to make sure that we're really careful of that as we go down this path with reading. The only other thing I wanted to say, Chelsea had talked a little bit about, I caught the end of her testimony, about the language in there being, making sure the language is not restrictive throughout. She made some very good suggestions, and I know there's going to be more conversation and testimony on this. I know you've had Gwen Carmoli in already to testify. I think she's a very strong person to have testify again to talk about specific attributes that Chelsea brought up. And I would consider it really important that you, again, keep this advisory council moving forward and reading. I think it's one program. I hate committees that last forever. This is probably one that probably should. And that's all.
Anything else from Mr. Nichols? Great testimony, both of you. Excellent. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm feeling really good that we'll confident we'll get there.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your work on this, folks. We do appreciate it and appreciate you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Appreciate that.
Oh, am I supposed to talk about 127 or am I all set?
You're welcome to stay on for 127 if you want to. You mean Act 127?
People waiting.
Yeah, why don't you stick around? We're gonna come back here in about 10 minutes. Why don't you stick around if you'd like to weigh in a little bit? That'd be terrific.
Okay, it's going to be very, very short.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
And Morgan, if you would take us